Hello, everyone. Welcome back to your classroom. I'm your host, Thatcher Taylor, certified financial planner, owner of ProPath Financial, and this is episode 36 of the Functional Retirement Podcast. We're going to talk about some retirement withdrawal strategies that can maybe yield a little more income, and this is just part of learning about how retirement works. So thanks for tuning in. First things first, if you want to read the supplemental blog or listen to this or watch it, if you're listening to this, great. If you're watching, great. Anything that you want to find can be found on propathfinancial.com/post/more retirement income. I'll put the link below in the comments and in the show notes if you want to check that out and read the full supplementary blog to be able to learn more about how to get more retirement income. So when it comes to retirement, spending is it. Spending is what we got to find out. How are we going to be able to get you enough money for as long as you need that money? That's the big kicker. That's the whole thing about retirement. There's a lot of other things that come into that: enjoyment, happiness, health, goals. Those are all very important. But we got to figure out how much you can safely spend in retirement for as long as you need it. What if you spent too much too early and through the rest of retirement you got very little? Or what if you spent very little too early and you got towards the end of retirement and you're about to go to your next destination, if you will, and you look back, man, I left way too much money on the table. That's why it's important to find out how we can safely distribute assets for as long as we potentially need them. So why is that whole equation so difficult? If spending is the most important piece of retirement, we got to figure out why initially it's so difficult before we move into some of the strategies. And the first one is because we don't know when you're going to die. If we knew when you were going to die, we would be able to distribute assets very easily. Say we knew that you had $1 million and you're going to die in 10 years. I'd be like, we know for sure you're going to die in 10 years. Let's just distribute $100,000 a year. Or maybe let's do 95 a year just so we can inflation adjust it over time. Maybe get a little growth in the portfolio if we got lucky. But in general, if we knew when you were going to die, I would be able to tell you exactly how much you can spend and then a reasonable probability. The next reason why it's so difficult is because for some of you, spending has always been tough. You've accumulated these assets because you were a lot better at putting money aside than you were spending that new money. So you've been a big saver, and then all of a sudden I got to turn you into a big spender in retirement. That's very difficult. Lastly, one reason spending is so difficult is because some people want to spend more. You want to buy things, you want to spend more money, but you don't have enough. So it makes spending seem extremely tight or restrictive or difficult. There's obviously a lot of nuance between there. There's a lot of gray area on that spectrum. But managing behaviors helps to clean up the difficulty of working into retirement. This is a lot about the income distribution strategies and financial planning. So, depending on your age, you're in one of two phases. A lot of financial planners will talk about these two phases and they'll start to break them down a little bit further. But essentially, there's two phases to this whole life: the accumulation phase and the decumulation phase. The accumulation phase usually starts sometime in your 20s and ends sometime around 50 or 60, maybe even 70, where you in that period of time are trying to accumulate as much in assets as you can, and a bunch of life gets thrown in the way along the way. You got hurdles of family, kids, job loss, new job, maybe try to start businesses. There's great successes and sometimes some failures. And there's a lot of stuff that happens along the way in the accumulation phase. And then the decumulation phase comes, and a lot of people think the same way. They think about decumulation the way that they think about accumulation, where it's a completely different game. There's a little bit of overlap, but you're playing a different game. It's like tennis and basketball are two different games. But there's a little bit of overlap in which they both use round balls, and to score, one team has to put it on the other side of the net or the midcourt, and the other team has to work its way back with them both playing offensively and defensively. but they're different sports. Accumulation, decumulation are very similar. There's asset management, there's managing income, cash flow, insurance protection, goals. There are all these things that are similar, but they're two completely different games. So make sure, here's what I want you to do. Make sure to send me a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, or send me an email. My email will be below. And which do you think is more important, accumulation or decumulation? I'd like to hear your thoughts. So when it comes to decumulation, one of the biggest things is the income question. And where it usually starts is the 4% rule. Now, attention turns directly to the 4% rule because everyone writes about it and talks about it. A lot of people Google it, which it's just, if you don't know what it is, it's a simple rule of thumb to guide retirement spending. From Bill Bangan's research, Bill Bangan said it's the highest withdrawal rate that would have worked with historical, traditional US market returns for a person or a family who would just inflation adjust their spending each year over a 30-year retirement. So again, 30 years in retirement, you got $1 million. You can take $40,000 plus inflation every single year for 30 years with a very high probability. And you just invest those assets in probably a 70-30 stock to fixed income allocation of some sort in the broad-based market. So you're getting Social Security, you and your spouse, maybe $40,000. You distribute another $40,000 a year of income. You're getting $80,000 a year with some inflation adjustments from Social Security and your portfolio. That's the first rule that everyone refers to. And in general, if you used this rule, you most likely would be okay. The kicker about this rule is you end up, and again, there are probabilities in this because there's a lot of market scenarios that you run through a Monte Carlo simulation. But in that 30-year period of time, you ended up with a very similar amount of assets that you started with. So $1 million a year one. In 30 years, you have about $1 million a year. And throughout that period of time, you were able to distribute $40,000 plus inflation. So year one, $40,000. Year two, $40,000 plus some inflation. That number plus some inflation. That number plus some inflation. So you were able to continue to grow over 30 years and still maintain a lot of assets. So this is the first place we need to diverge, where you need to start thinking about what type of investor you are, or excuse me, what type of retiree you are. Some retirees, it's very important to leave a legacy where you're trying to leave as much as you can to your family. Some retirees want to spend as much as they can and leave very little to their family. Now, if you thought about that for a second, you're like, what type of person am I? I don't really know. Maybe I'm a little bit of both. That's okay, because there's a lot of nuance to this. And so a good financial planner, we have the ability to figure out what type of investor you are. And we're going to use 3 different types of investors when we talk about sustainable suspending from volatile portfolios. And by volatile portfolios, we essentially mean portfolios that are going to have some sort of equity exposure. Now, I don't mean individual stocks where you're trying to buy and sell and pick individual stocks. I mean a broadly diversified portfolio that Jack Bogle says, the creator of Vanguard, says instead of buying or trying to find the needle in the haystack, just buy the haystack. I think that's just a phenomenal analogy. So here's how this works. There's a conservative couple, there's a moderate couple, there's an aggressive couple. Conservative, moderate, aggressive. These are both couples, but even if you're not in a couple, you're an individual at this point, you can still utilize these different type of portfolios based on your specific goals. Now, I should tell you, a lot of this comes from Retirement Researcher, retirementresearcher.com. I'll put this link below that you can check out some of this. I'm also going to give you the ability to read through this on your own. Again, on my website, I'll upload some images, but you'll be able to see a lot of this on retirementresearcher.com underneath their dashboard. But they utilized in their research 3 separate couples. A conservative couple uses a 25% stock allocation, again, a diversified stock allocation, and seeks a 95% chance that their real wealth will not fall below 10% of its initial level by year 35. So this is the couple where they maybe want to leave a legacy. They do not want their wealth to withdraw. They want to maintain as much wealth as possible. Usually with this couple, they're going to spend very little. They're very conservative. A moderate couple uses a 50% stock allocation, and the other 50% is fixed income of some sort, and seeks a 90% chance that real wealth will not deplete by year 30 of retirement. So that's a very interesting situation to be in where you don't want your wealth to deplete by 90%. So you want to end up with, if we use $1 million or let's say $2 million, you want to end up with about 1.6 million at the end of your retirement by year 30. And the aggressive couple uses a 75% stock allocation and seeks an 80% chance that real wealth will not deplete by year 30 of retirement. So you're probably asking yourself, what's the value of being one of these versus the other? What you'll see in a minute, I'll give you a little Easter egg. It's how much you get to spend. Because the real way to spend extra in most cases is being able to withhold a high quality equity position where your assets can grow. So that's finding the balance of being able to spend more and incorporate more growth from equity exposure in your portfolio. So here's what you need to know. Well, again, I'll put this chart here, but from these three couples, the conservative couple, the moderate couple, and the aggressive couple, and again, propathfinancial.com/post/, and you got to remember it's post, not posts with an S, /post/more retirement income is going to have this chart. And in this chart by Retirement Researcher, there's 6 spending options. And I'm not going to go through every number. It would take me, 15 or 20 minutes to go through this. So I'll spare you this. But here's what I want to tell you. From the 6 spending options, we got to go through them because from these spending options, we're going to show you how to maximize your income from these options. And that's what this whole thing is. For more income in retirement, maximizing withdrawal strategies. So the first one is fixed spending, no growth. So you just spend the same amount every single year. You don't get any growth in your portfolio. You can do spending with a 2% cost of living adjustment, where every single year you just give yourself a 2% boost. Number 3 is the inflation adjusted spending rule, or the 4% rule, where you spend 4% and then you inflation adjust it. Not just a 2% cost of living, but you inflation adjust it. And then number 4 is spending with a 2% COLA with 5 years of buffer assets. So you spend what you're going to spend plus a 2% cost of living adjustment, and then you put 5 years of buffer assets. So if you need $40,000 a year, you're going to put $200,000 of assets in a very low interest bearing account to make sure they're there regardless and basically invest the rest. There's the inflation adjusted spending with 5 years of COLA assets, the inflation adjusted spending with 5 years of buffer assets. So you inflation adjust your income based on what the inflation is. And then you have the 5 years of buffer assets. And then there's the last one, there's number 6, which is the Guyton and Klinger decision rules, which is basically the guardrails, which is based off market performance. If the market does well, you get a little bonus. If the market struggles, you get a little pay cut. Now that we have all these set up, and let me just reiterate, a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, is different than inflation adjusting. A cost of living adjustment is different than inflation. In these examples, a cost of living adjustment is just at 2%. Okay, so remember the conservative couple, the moderate couple, the aggressive couple. The conservative couple has 25% stock, moderate couple has 50% stock, and aggressive couple has 75% stock. And the conservative couple does not want their assets to fall below 10% in year 35. The moderate couple doesn't want it to fall below 10% in year 30. And the aggressive couple doesn't want it to fall more than 20% by year 30. Here's what this chart is telling us. In all situations, the conservative, the moderate, and the aggressive categories, the variable spending strategy allowed a person or a family to spend the most. Because you're monitoring the income based on the performance of the portfolio. In fact, the aggressive clients with the Guyton and Klinger decision rules, with the most stocks, 75% stocks, and not letting their assets deplete by more than 20%, in 30 years of retirement, they were able to spend almost 6% of their assets, which is 2% more than the 4% rule, which is a phenomenal result. The conservative has a very, very good option of spending about 3.66%. The reason for this is because they're not getting enough long-term growth because of the little equities they have in their portfolio. There are some other really great results. The fixed spending method in the aggressive, where you have more equities, had a 5.38% spending probability, or excuse me, a 5.38% withdrawal rate from their portfolio with a very high probability of success. That's some very interesting stuff. The worst method is in all these is the 4% rule. The 4% rule actually performed the worst out of all these other methods. The reason is these other methods are a little bit more dynamic. There's more flexibility in them. And a couple that had really great performances is either the options with buffer assets, putting assets on the side to protect you in the event of volatility. This is what a lot of people did not do in the crash of 2008, 2009, where they had all their assets in an investment portfolio. They were about to retire. Their portfolio dropped by 50%, and now they're making withdrawals from a portfolio that's worth less. What if you had a few years of buffer assets on the side and the portfolio dropped, and you're like, oh, that kind of stinks. I don't like that, but I still have money to access to get my income to let your portfolio rebound over the next couple of years. That performed really well with these buffer assets, which this is a perfect segue into our ways to increase income or be able to spend more in retirement. So now that you've decided whether or not you're a conservative couple, a moderate couple, or aggressive couple, or if you want to leave more assets to heirs, or if you want to spend a little bit more in retirement, that helps guide us to which type of couple you want. Let's assume we've got this kind of nailed down. Here's some ways that you could potentially increase spending to get more creative past just the withdrawal from the investment portfolio, which is potentially a really, really good option if you believe in a good long-term investment strategy. So the first one, we already talked about buffer assets. So these buffer assets are resources that are available outside of your investment portfolio that you can utilize if the market falls, like I mentioned in 2008, 2009. These returns should not function in the same way the market does. What I mean is, if the market drops, you want to have these assets in a place that's secure in a market drop. In addition, if the market goes up, these aren't necessarily going up with the market. They are allocated for a specific purpose to buffer or protect your portfolio. The two most popular buffer assets, which I agree with, but these are again from Retirement Researcher, are policy loans from cash value life insurance. I don't love it. The reason I don't love it is because this needed to be implemented years ago. And literally, I mean years ago. To build up the cash value that you need in a life insurance policy to be able to use this as a buffer asset is needed to be implemented a long time ago when you were younger and need to have been consistently contributed to over a long period of time so that cash value gets to a place. This isn't a terrible idea, but it can be utilized if you have this available. It's not most likely the best idea if you're 67 and you're like, I'm looking for some buffer assets. You try to go get underwritten for a life insurance policy. You're going to dump 200 grand into the cash value. The reason for that is it's probably not worth 200 grand right up front. The 200 grand is going to be worth less because of the cost of insurance. So it takes time to develop this, but it's possible. The second one that Retirement Researcher talks a lot about that I really do like in the right scenario, if this particular glove fits, is a reverse mortgage. Being able to finally utilize the equity in your home as income, because once the home is paid for, you have that asset. It's very hard to turn it into income because you're living in it. You can't utilize that asset. But let's say you wanted an extra few $100s a month or a couple $1,000s a year. A reverse mortgage can set you up for success by utilizing the equity in your home. And this does not mean the bank is going to take your home. You do not turn your home over to the bank. You have the ability to put a line of credit on your home and utilize it for an extended period of time. It's a very complex calculation, but it can be done. This also needed to be thought about years ago because the debt needs to have been paid down to a point where you have some equity in the home, or the home needs to have appreciated quite a bit to be able to have that available. Now, these are two really cool buffer assets that can be utilized, but this is just one of essentially the four ways that we're going to talk about that could be used to help reduce the need to withdraw money from that equity portion or the portfolio that has a lot of equities in it when it's in trouble. Because it will be. There's going to be a point where an equity position is going to be in trouble. It's going to struggle a little bit. But historically, those struggles are just speed bumps, and the portfolio ends up doing phenomenally well long term. So these can help support a higher spending rate with a very similar higher level of sustainability. Number two is what we kind of mentioned as well, the variable spending strategy. So spending can start with a variable spending strategy like the Guyton and Klinger guardrails, because there's a built-in willingness to pull back on your spending in certain years. So if you're going to use a more variable strategy like the guardrails from Guyton and Klinger, which is a very successful income distribution strategy, and you come to me and we're working together and I say, we're going to use this strategy in these years. If the portfolio does X amount, you're going to get a little bonus. If the portfolio struggles, you might get a pay cut of X amount. We'll have a good understanding. We'll have the guardrails already built where if the portfolio drops, say X percent, your withdrawal rate will drop a little bit to this amount. So we'll have these guardrails already set up. And a good advisor that's using this Klinger guardrails will have the same information set up for you. But you go into it knowing that maybe 1 or 2 years out of 10 years, you're going to have to take a little bit of pay cut. But when the market does well with this good equity exposure, you're going to get big bonuses and being able to spend more. And that strategy over long periods of time allows a family to actually distribute more consistently. According to this research, it's the most successful way. So in those years, there's an inflation adjustment. And sometimes maybe just the inflation adjustment is skipped in the years that the portfolio doesn't do as well. Here's kind of some percentages that you can take with you as we end this portion of variable spending strategy. Inflation adjustment is skipped in the years after the portfolio experiences a loss. And the spending is further cut by 10% permanently at any point in the first 15 years of retirement, then the withdrawal rate from remaining assets has risen more than 20% above its initial level due to declining portfolio balances. In a bad market, there could be several of these permanent 10% spending cuts. In the other direction, spending can also increase by 10% whenever the portfolio grows sufficiently so that the current withdrawal rate is more than 10% lower from where it started. These rules are complicated and they require careful monitoring. You can spend the most, but it does require the most hand-holding. And just to reiterate, the withdrawal rate is the initial portion, say $40,000 off $1 million portfolio. If the portfolio does well, that withdrawal rate actually goes down to meet your $40,000 need. If the portfolio does poorly, that withdrawal rate actually goes up, and that's where the guardrails come into play. So number 3 is insurance and investments. Insurance and investments could be molded together and have a very high success rate by guaranteeing income or creating your own pension. A way that you could really increase your income is like this. Say you had Social Security. Say you needed $100,000 a year or $80,000 a year, whatever number. Let's just use $80,000 a year, kind of to stay along the lines of the scenarios that I've been using before. Let's say you need $80,000 a year. You get $40,000 of Social Security. Social Security gets cost of living adjustments along the way on a year-to-year basis. What if you could guarantee the other 40% with an income annuity, not a variable annuity, not a universal annuity, a SPIA annuity, a single premium immediate annuity? And I have another annuity podcast came out a couple months ago. I'll link that below if you want to learn a little bit more about annuities. But a SPIA is a single premium immediate annuity where you could take a portion of your assets and immediately annuitize that into a guaranteed income stream for a period of time or the remainder of your life. There are quite a few options. you could use this combination to guarantee your income so you know you have a certain amount of income for the remainder of your life and your spouse's life. Then the remainder of the assets could be invested in a long-term built portfolio that could be used for the fun money, where you can take distributions and harvest gains and being able to spend them. So maybe in a really, really good year, you don't just spend 80, you spend 90 or 95 or 100 maybe. So you're distributing 10, 15, $20,000 from your portfolio based on performance. This is a really good way to increase the withdrawal rate from your portfolio to take a good percentage, 20, 30, 40% of your assets to guarantee your income, make you feel comfortable, and then invest the rest. This is a good way to blend insurance and investments. And number 4, I threw this in there. This isn't in the Retirement Researcher article, but another way to increase the success of your portfolio is tax efficient withdrawals. One way is sequencing up the distribution of your assets. Let's say you have taxable assets, tax deferred assets, and tax free assets like Roth assets. The tax deferred assets would be tax deferred IRAs and 401ks. And then taxable assets are just individual accounts, joint accounts, trust accounts, things like that. If you sequence up the distribution of your assets out of the tax type, because taxable, tax deferred, tax free, those are all account types that garner the taxation based on IRS rules. How you invest in them can be the exact same or completely different. But being able to distribute assets in the proper order can provide lower tax bills throughout the life of your distribution or decumulation phase, which the less money that goes to the IRS, the more money stays in your pocket or stays in your investment account to be able to grow or utilize. The conventional wisdom is taxable account first, then tax deferred assets, and then finally your tax-free assets like Roth IRA. The more you utilize strategies like this, the more money you get to increase in your bank accounts and utilize for your life. This is where it gets really into the weeds, but it's very, very valuable. Let's say you started to utilize 2 out of 4 of these. Let's say you use maybe some buffered assets, maybe a variable spending strategy, and maybe tax efficient withdrawals. Or what if you utilize insurance and investments, you utilize an annuity and tax efficient withdrawals? Or what if you utilize a variable spending strategy and insurance and you use the tax efficient withdrawals? You can start to see that adding these layers onto your income distribution strategy are the things that create a really high quality income distribution strategy in retirement where you can spend more safely and securely for as long as you need based on your goals. All right. That was a mouthful. So we've talked about a lot today. We're going to end there. We could keep going deep into each one of these, but we're already about 30 minutes into this podcast. So again, I'm going to put these screenshots in the article so you can see them. I'll hit the link to Retirement Researcher as well so you can see that. If you follow the post, propathfinancial.com/post/more retirement income, you'll be able to see a lot of the stuff I discussed and even be able to follow along. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put this up on the screen so you'll be able to see it and kind of follow along as well. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am accepting new clients. If you would like to learn more about building a better retirement, please reach out, propathfinancial.com, or check out the link below. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. We'll see you next time.